Judith Cochrane to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to move. Members will know that the issue of preschool provision has been debated in this House on various occasions. Indeed, it was the topic of my maiden speech back in June last year. Since then, I've written to the Minister, I've tried to meet with him, I've asked a number of questions on the issue, not to try and catch him out or to score any political points, but simply to try to resolve what is continuing to be a serious problem in my constituency of East Belfast, and I understand in various areas across Northern Ireland. I do not need to remind members of the merits of preschool education. I think we are all in agreement of that. And having seen the changes in my youngest daughter over the past 7 months as she progresses through her preschool year is testament to that fact. I was pleased when the Minister announced the review of the preschool admissions arrangements, but a review is meaningless if action is not taken on the recommendations. Therefore, many of you will recall my delight when the Minister made his statement to the House in January of this year on the actions he was intending to take on the back of this review. I didn't hear that. This brings me to the reason of this debate today, and let me quote a little from his statement. Mr Speaker, I have also identified some actions which I intend to progress immediately. The report confirms previous findings that the July-August birthday admissions criterion could potentially disadvantage younger children in their preschool year. I intend to revoke this criterion in the 1999 regulations and also to remove it as a priority criterion for non-statutory providers. When I probed the Minister a little further on this, he said, I acknowledge that a lot of the report's actions will not come into effect this year. They will affect the programme of work for 2013-14. I hope to deal with the July-August birthday issue in legislation connected to Education and Skills Authority. And if that is not felt to be the appropriate manner in which to address the issue, I will introduce separate legislation, but I am keen to remove that provision from the statute book. In February at question time, I asked the Minister if the removal of the July-August criterion will happen in time for the 2013-14 intake, and explained that the admissions booklets would be produced in September of this year, so he really needed to act now, and he said he would do it as quickly as possible. I am extremely dismayed, therefore, to hear from his officials that the Minister wants to wait until he has something more appropriate in its place before he removes the priority criterion. I understand that the social disadvantage criterion needs to be looked at in more detail, and this will be a more complicated change, given that research shows that those children from socially disadvantaged backgrounds benefit more from a preschool experience than those children from families who are not in receipt of income support or JSA. Although I do believe, just on that point, that we could still ensure those children receive a place, it just might not necessarily be their first preference. But let's be clear on this. We have established that the July-August criterion is wrong and that potentially it disadvantages younger children who are in the same academic year. I'd rather not at the minute. I have a number of points that I want to cover. If I have time at the end, yes, certainly. The Minister said he would introduce separate legislation if ESA legislation was not in place quickly enough. And whilst the ESA legislation is progressing, it will not be complete in time. The Minister has the power to act on this now, and the parents want action. I'd also like to take this opportunity to comment on a few other findings from the review and actions that the Minister specifically referred to in his January statement. Firstly, have any steps been taken to ensure that the statistical data collected, which is used to inform local area planning, will be improved? Has the Department even asked the Education and Library Boards and the Preschool Education Advisory Groups for better data? I know the Belfast Board were trying to gather figures for this year on July-August birthdays, but we're struggling to. Secondly, has the Department reviewed its policy on enrolment numbers to see if greater flexibility can be introduced, for example, for time-limited extensions outside of a development proposal? This is particularly important for this year's intake, as it may allow some of those children who are currently without an offer to receive a place. Although I would caveat that by saying that I have spoken to some nursery principals who have suggested that the 13:1 ratio is already quite difficult, particularly at the start of a school year when many children have very little independence. Thirdly, has there been any progress on area-based planning? I understand that the planning of places is particularly challenging, as there can be significant variations in numbers and in locations each year. It is difficult, but it is not rocket science. And I personally have been able to work proactively with preschool providers and the boards to try to alleviate problems in East Belfast, for example, securing additional sessions in St Columcille's at Ballyhackamore. But area planning only works if you have criteria in place that prioritise the children that live in that area. Continuing to include the July-August birthday criterion will continue to allow children from elsewhere to displace children who live maybe a few streets away. For example, in the current intake, and I appreciate that it is still ongoing, some East Belfast nurseries have had to offer children who live in Conlake, Dunmurry and Green Island places because they were born in July and August. This may suit their parent because of where they work or where a grandparent lives, but it is not fair and it should not be allowed to continue. I personally have also done an analysis of the situation in my constituency, and to be fair to the Minister, there has been an increase in the number of places over the last few years. A rough estimate would show that we are now short of places by approximately 10% when comparing P1 intakes over the last 3 years to the number of preschool places available. This 10% figure would be in line with the Department's suggestions that approximately 10% of parents do not want a place for their child, or they do not take up the offer of a place because it doesn't suit their personal circumstances. My experience is that parents do want a place, but the personal circumstances for many of those is simply because that they work and they are unable to juggle to get children to a part-time session, especially an afternoon session. So if that is their only choice because they have a job, that's hardly fair. And I think the Department needs to take note of this when looking at the preschool admissions code in the future. The reason many parents can't take up the offer of a part-time place is that because they need to juggle it with their working patterns, and often that is not possible no matter how hard they try. Not everyone can afford to pay £40 per day to have their child in a daycare environment that can drop the child to a session at 12:15 and pick them up again at 2:45. That's just one example of many parents are facing. And finally, I would like to ask, have any improvements been made to the application process, including a better communication strategy? I personally wrote an article for the Belfast Telegraph last December to try to encourage parents to visit the preschool settings and to talk through the admissions criteria with the individual providers. This might assist them in making choices with positive outcomes. Can I also say that I trust the letters of offer next year will not be sent out when the schools are closed for Easter. I spent most of recess talking to distressed parents who felt they'd nowhere else to turn for advice. And I think that the timings of the letters also put pressure on those working in the boards who were inundated with calls. I think the Department is taking positive steps, but it's just not quickly enough. Following an Alliance proposal to amend the admissions procedure to a two-step process to give priority to children in their immediate preschool year over those in their penultimate year, the previous Minister made these changes and it has made a difference. Today, Minister, I'm asking you to take the next step now and remove the July-August criterion in time for the 2013-14 intake. Children are only in their preschool year once. In 2 years' time, they'll be in primary 2. So fixing the problem then is just not good enough. Thank you.
Mervyn Storey, Chair of the